I was born in Albania. Lived there till the age of 10, which is when we moved to London. I have very fond memories of my childhood in Albania. I'm the eldest of 3 girls. I've got 2 younger sisters. My family was from the north, that we lived in the capital. We would spend the summers with my grandparents. I just remember days of climbing trees and picking fruits from the garden and being on the swings and just playing out all the time. So I think it was a very happy and carefree childhood, which I feel very privileged to have had. My parents had to move from Albania to seek political asylum in the UK. We were only told that we were leaving just a few days before we left. I think that was done to protect us. We knew obviously of the circumstances of what had happened just a few weeks beforehand, so we knew that we weren't necessarily safe. There's a huge sadness in, I think, leaving behind a place that was so important. But the way that it was framed by our parents was that this would be a trip. So I think that helped create almost a sense of excitement about what was going to come up in the next few weeks in this new place. My grandparents came with us to the airport to say goodbye, and that was very emotional. But I think at the time, they knew a lot more than we did. So I think for them, this was potentially a final goodbye. And then we landed in London, and my parents had a very long discussion with the immigration officials at the airport. It's only later, when I was older, that I learned that that's when they'd sought asylum. Many, many hours later, we were allowed to leave, and we were put up in some temporary accommodation where families claiming asylum were kept from anything from 2 weeks to 3 years. And unfortunately, we happened to be in the latter group. It was a world away from the world we'd come from. Growing up, playing around this huge garden, and we had a big house. Condensing that world into one room was a huge transition. Initially, we were all very upset about having to share this tiny space together. There were times when we felt quite angry. The hostel itself, it wasn't very well kept. It was in quite a derelict building. There was damp on the ceiling. The carpets weren't always very clean. Definitely not the environment you'd want to bring up a family. I remember keeping a diary. It was my way of processing the feeling in a way that was private, of creating some personal space. We're quite a resilient family, and I think we found ways of adapting, so we tried to compartmentalise the space we did have in some way. I think there's also the sense of embarrassment if you're at school and people ask you where you lived. When you go to other children's homes and you see that people don't quite live in the same way. I remember coming with my dad actually to Salisbury to fill out some paperwork, and within a few days I seemed to then end up in a classroom, so everything happened very quickly. It was probably the best possible school me or my sisters could have ended up in. Salisbury World became almost a second home and a place of solace. But the activities also really helped, and allowing you to integrate with a new culture, see a new city, learn more of the language, and just have that opportunity to have fun and be a child. I'm very lucky to have powerful, strong female role models in my life. One of the memories I do have from my childhood is in Albania. We had a floor-to-ceiling bookcase. On the lower shelves, there were 2 massive tomes, and they were medical encyclopedias. My dad is not a doctor, but he'd wanted to be one in his teenage years. And because of political issues, he wasn't allowed to do that. I remember taking these green tomes and putting them into my dad's work suitcase and pretending that was my doctor's bag. I feel incredibly privileged to realise that childhood dream and become a doctor, and it's something that to this day, I find very fulfilling. I spent part of my medical training in Cambridge, which was an incredible experience. I definitely went there with a lot of apprehension and uncertainty, but it's the most intellectually stretched I think I've ever felt. I think it's the humanity of medicine, which I find incredibly fulfilling and rewarding. I count myself very lucky to have grown up in 2 very different cultures, and despite having spent 2/3 of my life in the UK, I very much identify as being Albanian, and I think those early experiences and the memories associated with it are so strong and vivid that it's very hard to separate myself from that time of my life.